This is Up Close. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. This week on Up Close, two debut novels track the Jewish immigrant experience. Boris Fishman's debut novel was lauded on the cover of the New York Times Book Review. It explores what things are like for late 20th century Soviet emigres and has a fascinating twist around the fabrication of Holocaust reparations claims. Fishman's novel is A Replacement Life. And Susan Jane Gilman is known as the author of 3 popular works of nonfiction, but in her debut novel, she tells a classic American story of a tough woman who won't let the experience of being a poor Jewish immigrant on the Lower East Side keep her from what she wants. Her novel is The Ice Cream Queen of Orchard Street. But first, here's my interview with Boris Fishman. So it's a beautiful novel that's very well written, and it's got great characters, but unquestionably the headline out of it will be the piece that people will know about it before they've read the book is that it's about fraud in Holocaust reparations claims. We've seen a lot of news about that in recent years. How did you come upon the idea of making that your claim for this book?
I started writing it before that news broke. I started writing in the fall of '09, and that was exposed in 2010, though it had been going on since the 90s. But for me, the story had its origin 15 years before, in the mid-90s. My grandmother, unfortunately, I have to say was, not is, she passed away, was a survivor. When we got out of the Soviet Union, she became eligible to apply for restitution because people behind the Iron Curtain were not. At that point, we'd been in America for 6-8 years. I had the best English in the family because I was the youngest by far. I was 15 or 16, and the paperwork was given to me. And it was quite exciting even at that early age because it kind of came down to how good a story you could tell. They didn't really ask. They asked for documentation if you had it, but that wasn't a true barrier if you didn't. So this matter of the historical record became a matter of storytelling. And for a young writer, or an aspiring writer, that's pure catnip.
The book follows, through its main character, this family that came over from the Soviet Union with 3 generations from grandparents and then a young child and his parents. And the same way that you came over. When that happens, there's this generational problem.
When you immigrate to a country as comprehensively foreign from the Soviet Union as America is, I mean, your viewers have to imagine immigrating to North Korea right now. Do you know what I mean? And you grew up with a lifelong inferiority complex about being Jewish. It is something you do not advertise. It is something you're highly self-conscious about. But also, the flip side of that, it is something then that you're much more defensive about when it's attacked by your own. Because the people in the community that I come from went through the war and lost extended families and suffered unimaginably. And so for them to be told that they're not adequate Jews is very, very painful. And it must be a permutation on the kind of attack that they felt in the Soviet Union. And so it brings up some of those feelings of defensiveness and hurt. Immigrating to America is an interesting experience because unlike 100 years ago, when you were really expected to assimilate, that is not the case now. I know so many people who took up residence in South Brooklyn and really have remained in a kind of Soviet Union of the soul, and their children are far closer to those traditions than you'd imagine. And by traditions, I mean how they relate to their parents. However, even as you go like this, you want to honor and respect your elders. But how do you honor your elders if their definition of honor is different? And sort of building that bridge is something that I really wanted to explore in the novel.
And now Susan Jane Gilman talks about her character, the Ice Cream Queen of Orchard Street. Your novel's about many things. It's about the immigrant experience for Jews and Italians at the turn of the last century. It's about the Lower East Side. It's about business. It's about ice cream. But putting it more directly, what do you think it's about?
I wrote it out of 2 impulses. One is that I came across sort of the classic immigrant story and found out how tied it was to ice cream. Tom Carvel, who has this huge franchise in the Northeast, his real name was Tom Carvalis. He was a Greek immigrant who arrived here penniless and then built an empire, the first empire of kosher ice cream, even though he was Greek. And then I found out that Haagen-Dazs was created by 2 Russian Jewish immigrants living in the Bronx who rose up from the tenements. And I thought this would just make a great story. But the problem was, in real life, these ice cream makers were really lovely people. They loved children, they loved charity, they loved ice cream, and as a novelist, that just didn't interest me at all.
Yeah, lovely people don't really work for fiction.
No, and lovely people doing nice things and then succeeding, that's not a story. But I had this impulse. I wanted to write this really delicious female anti-hero, you know, somebody who's just loaded with chutzpah and kind of ruthless, who you secretly root for anyway, you know, kind of a combination Leona Helmsley and Scarlett O'Hara. So I put these two ideas together, and then the book just took off on its own, and it took in the history of the 20th century, America, as paralleled with this history of ice cream and the immigrant experience in New York, and it just got bigger and bigger. There's
a lot of research you can tell in this novel, a lot of research of circumstance and probably some real biographies out there. What is it about the Lower East Side immigrant experience that you found that you felt you needed to tell that story?
It's a classic story, so I wanted to put a twist on it. Plus, the Lower East Side, as you may know, it was sort of the clearinghouse for most of the immigrants up through the beginning of the 20th century. So first you had Germans, then you had Jews and Germans, and Irish, and then the Italians. So I wanted to make this, although it's a very specific, in a way, Jewish story, also universal to what people went through. And there are myths, particularly in the Lower East Side. It was so concentrated. At one point, it was the densest neighborhood in the United States, if not on the planet, at the time they were measuring this, that it seemed to me the cauldron of this sort of story, unlike any other place.
And in particular to the immigrant experience and that kind of Leona Helmsley character, it's a lot about the choices we make when we don't, when we're just seeming to pursue, I'm just trying to get through the day here. But yeah, a lot of people left behind.
Exactly. My character, who starts off life as Malka Trainovsky, and then, like so many Jewish immigrants, reinvents herself here. She becomes Lillian Dunkel. She doesn't start out as a hideous person. And the idea of an ice cream titan who hates children and hates ice cream is funny. But I didn't want that to be a one-liner. So then you have to say, what makes somebody do this? And to that I looked to the immigrant story and the survival and the wheeling and dealing that was needed just to kind of triumph over her circumstances.
That's all for this week's abbreviated web episode of Up Close. A reminder, you can see the full episode of Up Close on the Jewish channel on cable, or listen to the full audio of the show as a podcast, available on iTunes and your favorite podcast player. Jewish channel is available on cable, Time Warner Cable Channel 528, IO Optimum Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, Cox Cable Channel 1, Frontier Communications, and on Comcast in the on-demand menu under Premium Channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.